Betty Broderick was born Elizabeth Ann Bisceglia on November 7, 1947, in Eastchester, New York. Raised in a strict Catholic working-class family, she was taught from an early age that a woman's primary role was to marry well, raise children, and support her husband. The Bisceglia household emphasized conservative values, reinforcing the belief that a woman's success was measured by her ability to maintain a family. Betty, the third of 6 children, was expected to be a devoted wife and mother. Nothing more, nothing less. From an early age, she was conditioned to dream of a fairy tale life, and she pursued it with unwavering determination. In 1965, Betty enrolled at Mount St. Vincent College, a small Catholic school in New York. It was during a college football weekend at the University of Notre Dame that she met Daniel T. Broderick III, a charming, ambitious, and confident medical student. He came from an Irish Catholic background and had big dreams of becoming a doctor, and later a lawyer. Betty was smitten by his intelligence and drive, seeing him as the perfect husband who could provide her with the stability and prestige she had always desired. The two quickly fell in love, and despite their vastly different upbringings, they seemed like a perfect match. Betty and Dan married in 1969, shortly after Dan graduated from Cornell Medical School. Betty worked as a school teacher and did odd jobs to support Dan while he pursued an additional degree in law at Harvard Law School. She took on the full weight of their household, sacrificing her own ambitions to help Dan succeed. Money was tight, their home was modest, and Betty bore the brunt of the responsibilities. Over the years, she gave birth to their children, including Kim, Lee, Daniel IV, and Rhett. She believed she was fulfilling her life's purpose, raising a family, and supporting her husband's career. After earning both his medical and law degrees, Dan became a highly successful malpractice attorney in San Diego, California. His unique expertise in both medicine and law allowed him to thrive in the field, and soon, he was making a substantial fortune. The Brodericks moved into an affluent La Jolla neighborhood, living the dream life Betty had always wanted. She had expensive clothes, a beautiful home, and access to elite social circles. On the surface, they appeared to be the epitome of success. But beneath the glamorous exterior, cracks were forming in their marriage. Dan's grueling work schedule left Betty feeling isolated, though she tolerated it for years. However, by the early 1980s, Betty began suspecting that something was wrong. Dan had hired a young, attractive legal assistant named Linda Kolkina, and Betty quickly sensed an inappropriate relationship between them. Though Dan denied any affair, he became increasingly distant and dismissive toward his wife. Betty's suspicions grew into obsession and paranoia, leading to heated arguments. She felt betrayed after all the sacrifices she had made for him, and she could not comprehend how the man she had supported through his struggles could now turn against her. In 1983, Betty's worst fears were confirmed. Dan was having an affair with Linda Kolkina, his much younger employee. The revelation shattered Betty's world. She had sacrificed her youth, her career, and her independence for Dan, only to be replaced by someone she saw as an unworthy interloper. Betty's resentment festered, and she became increasingly erratic. She confronted Dan in dramatic ways, at one point throwing their wedding dress into a bonfire. The fights escalated, and Betty's behavior became more volatile as she felt herself losing control of her life. The Brodericks' divorce proceedings were among the most acrimonious legal battles in California's history. Dan, who had deep connections in the legal system, used his influence to gain the upper hand. He took control of their assets, locked Betty out of their home, and obtained full custody of their children. Betty, with no legal expertise, struggled to fight back. She left angry voicemails, vandalized his property, and even drove her car through the front door of their former home. She believed Dan was using his legal knowledge to manipulate the system, leaving her financially and emotionally destitute. As the divorce dragged on, Betty's mental state deteriorated. She felt utterly powerless, convinced that Dan and Linda were conspiring against her. Her rage and obsession consumed her, and she was unable to move forward. Her children became pawns in their parents' war, further exacerbating the situation. She was arrested multiple times for violating restraining orders, yet she believed she was the victim, abandoned after years of sacrifice. Despite Betty's relentless protests, Dan and Linda married in April 1989. The wedding was an extravagant affair, but it was marked by unease. Linda was so afraid of Betty's unpredictability that she hired private security for the event. She feared that Betty would one day kill them, a concern that tragically proved to be well-founded. In the early morning hours of November 5, 1989, just before her 42nd birthday, Betty broke into Dan and Linda's home with a Smith & Wesson revolver. She crept into their bedroom and shot them both while they slept. Dan was fatally wounded, and Linda was killed instantly. As Dan gasped for air, Betty pulled the phone cord out of the wall, ensuring he could not call for help. Then she fled the scene. After the murders, Betty turned herself in, admitting to the killings but claiming it was not premeditated. She insisted that she had gone to their home to confront Dan and Linda but had lost control. The case became a media sensation, as many debated whether Betty was a cold-blooded killer or a victim driven to the brink by years of emotional torment. Betty's first trial in 1990 ended in a hung jury, as some jurors sympathized with her claims of emotional abuse. However, in 1991, she was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. She has since been denied parole multiple times as she remains unapologetic for her actions. The case remains one of the most infamous domestic crime stories in American history. It has been adapted into books, TV movies, and documentaries, with the most notable being Dirty John, the Betty Broderick story, 2020. Many still debate whether Betty was a tragic figure or a dangerous killer. As of today, Betty Broderick remains in prison with little chance of release. Her story serves as a cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and revenge, highlighting the dangers of unchecked emotions and the devastating consequences of domestic warfare.